I'm often reminded of that wonderful proverb, which is if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. You're determining, well, what makes me unique amongst everything else. And once you have that, you begin to understand a little bit of who you are, and you have some of the building blocks of the story of what drives you. One of the exercises I do is inspired by Ernest Hemingway. As the story goes, he was in a bar in Havana, and he bet the guy next to him that he could write a short story in 6 words. Now, often what happens is people are telling the story all differently. So bringing everybody into the same room, doing some of this exercise, we begin to align and get people thinking the same way.
This is the Relentless Pursuit of Winning podcast, where we are here to educate, equip, and inspire people to build extraordinary companies. We're so glad you're here. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you can get updates every time we drop a new episode. Now let's get it started. Hey guys, welcome to the Relentless Pursuit of Winning podcast. My name is Rick Meekins. I'm the managing partner at Epiphany and the host of the Relentless Pursuit of Winning podcast. We have in the studio today, Henry Wong, the brand guy. Hey, Henry, how are you, man?
Excellent. Thank you so much for having me on.
Absolutely. Looking forward to it. I'd like to jump right into it. So, Henry, do me a favor. Tell us a little bit about yourself, why you do what you do, and what you love.
Yeah, so I run a branding consultancy agency called View here in Toronto, Canada, and I primarily work with companies that seek to have an impact on the world. Along the way, I guess, in spite of my boyish looks, I've managed to accumulate many years in the business. So I'm now author of a book called Telling Your Story, which is really a guideline to exacting your brand in the marketplace, whether you're a person or a product or service. I focus a lot these days on people, of course. So that is wonderfully why I like to. I'm looking forward to connecting with you.
Awesome. I don't hear that a lot. Where we talk about the connection with brand and people. What do you mean? What should we glean from that?
Yeah, I know a lot of people tend to think, I have to work on my brand, so they believe that simply is just getting out there, getting known in that. But really, it's much more than that. It is very much like a product or a service out in the marketplace. You're trying to establish a position and meaning to people. And what I hope to do and what I've been sharing with people is the manner by which you can do that. And that's often just relying on the power of your story to be able to get that position and your brand out in the marketplace.
Cool. I would have to admit, that's something I've been thinking about, in the past couple of years. What is my brand? How do I show up? And that's really interesting. What got you into branding?
I think it had a lot to do with just not being maybe able to do things in life. I just seem to gravitate a lot towards the creative side of marketing. So for many years, I was a creative director and brand strategist for a lot of major ad agencies. And about 6, 7 years ago, I decided to go off on my own and only focus purely on impact companies. And along the way, what I found was that there were many individuals who were looking to build their brand at the same time. Because upstarts, particularly companies that are founder-based, often have the founder and the company's brand intertwined. So there's a wonderful bit of magic that begins to happen. And when they begin sharing their story, amazing things begin happening in that people want to connect with them. They want to understand a lot more of what they're all about. And more importantly, they come along for this mission and this ride that they've created.
Interesting. So they're looking at their brand from, I guess, the way they're showing up. Does their brand align with perhaps like their personal beliefs? Like, does it help them, maybe articulate or give them permission to be that person? Or do they create alternate brands for, facing the public? How does all that work?
I think the best brands are the ones that are true to the core that, what these days we call being authentic. And we see this a lot with, performers, actors, or even politicians who I have helped where they try to manifest a type of persona out in the marketplace What happens often is that the real person may not connect properly with that, or they get found out, or their true colors begin showing, and you really can't sell the public on that. The best thing for you to always do is to be authentic to yourself, to be true to yourself, so that you can bring that out. And so my approach and my belief is that you don't manufacture it. You find the best part of what you have and bring that to life.
Okay. Okay. Cool. Got it. Got it. Got it. How interesting. It was, just thinking about it from like a public speaking perspective or something like that. The idea of being authentic. I mean, it just makes it perfect. And then the brand, I guess, working with you helps tell that story. So as I'm creating a
Exactly.
bio or okay, cool. What is that process like?
Actually, very thorough. So in the book, it actually outlines a step-by-step approach, which is really first taking stock of who you are and yourself. If you were a product and working with me in my agency, we'd be doing consumer research, for example. We'd get poll studies. We would speak to people. With people brands, it's not as deep that way, but it's not that difficult for a person to run on their own, meaning you have a sense of who you are, and you could do personality tests, for example, or ways of assessing who you are as an individual. You get input from your friends and colleagues, and that gives another dimension. You have, maybe reports from employers and so forth. All of that begins to form a picture of who you are. Ultimately, what you're looking to do is to try to find a unique position in the marketplace. Through all of that, you're determining, well, what makes me unique? What makes me different amongst everything else? And once you have that, you begin to understand a little bit of who you are, and tracing back to how you got there, you have some of the building blocks of a story of who you are and what perhaps drives you. One of the most important things that we do is to help understand your purpose and your mission, whether it's in life or the reason why you've started the company or the reason why you exist in the job marketplace. Through that all becomes intertwined and ties together, and you find a way of interestingly a way to present it. And everybody has this in itself. Like you did this wonderful podcast, Rick. I'm going to turn the tables a little bit on you. Where did you get started, and how did this come about for you?
The podcast itself or kind of my
Yeah,
purpose?
yeah, and your purpose, and your advisory and consulting and so forth.
Sure, for sure. Well, for me, I saw a specific problem, so I looked at it from the people perspective. I have a passion for seeing people being able to be, self-sufficient at whatever level. So that looks like a job, that looks like starting a company or whatever it is. And looking at the top, the people that create jobs, those are the people that are probably the diamonds. Those are the people that are best for me, to be able to help. My mission, and I went through this whole mission exercise, I don't know, 20 years ago, something like that. And what came out of that is I'm really interested in educating, inspiring, and equipping people to pursue extraordinary goals, or the way that I say it, build extraordinary companies. And so RPOW really is a platform for that. So I bring people on like you to help inspire people and to give people more tools and that sort of thing, so that, being an entrepreneur, being a CEO, running a company is a very lonely business. Talking to other professionals and getting other information in, just kind of makes the world, hopefully makes the world a little bit smaller.
And you summed it up really well. And through what you were saying, I heard the word help maybe 3 times. And that to me is probably your driving force in many ways. You're really genuinely driven by this desire to help people. And that in a way becomes your mission. And so we do this a little bit of an exercise with people to really understand what drives them. For everybody, it's a little bit different. It could be money. It could be bettering the world. It could be a better mousetrap, for example. In itself, there's often something that drives that founder to success. And your desire, for example, seems to be to help people. And that's a wonderful way to drive your business. So through that, we begin to look at how we bring that to life. So you look for stories and examples of how that has maybe manifested itself. And then it becomes, again, those building blocks for what your brand becomes. And from there, and only then do you, when you figure out those sort of magic words, then you begin to create the brand itself, whether it's a logo, whether it's taking it to social media, a certain sort of conceptual advertising, and on like that. But the work begins at the beginning, of course, to get to it.
Yeah, yeah. I think for me, mission has always been mission, purpose,
Hmm.
meaning have always been important to me because
when things got tough, when I couldn't necessarily see that end or wanted to, do something different. It was just like, okay, why are we here?
Yeah.
And it really helped me to recenter myself.
And it keeps
I just,
driving you, no doubt.
yeah, yeah.
What I
What
find
about you?
Well, myself, it really is very aligned with what you're all about, Rick, and that is trying to find ways to help the world and help better things. And that's why it really is only the companies that want to have a positive effect on society that I work with. So I have food companies that I work with, cybersecurity companies, people who want to, enter into politics or all sorts of things. And when those missions align, it's really quite magical because then you really understand each other and you understand how to maybe drive them forward. But being very clear on that purpose that you're talking about is fundamental to, I think, a company's success. Because in the beginning, it really is a bit of loneliness, isn't it? You have your idea and you're running the company and you may have a few employees. How do you get other people on board and how do you get them to work? And the ones that, and we've seen this in recent history, how just having this wonderful purpose can bring people aboard. And it's often what drives nonprofits, of course, to keep people motivated. They're going towards a common purpose. That can be applied in the profit world, of course, because often you have a purpose. And when people align with that, then that's where the power really begins to happen. When they don't, and you see this as well, when the purposes are crossed, then there's a little bit of discomfort, as you can see, and they're often not right for the job, or they're not the right people, or not the right customers, and so forth. And many founders find this to be true in the end. It's sometimes better to be the right thing to the right people rather than everything to everyone, because you can't, in the end, please everybody. There's just too many people in the world, as we can see.
Yeah, yeah, I agree with that. I mean, there's other people, that, might be better fit. That's something, I've always believed that we should be very transparent about. When we're hiring people, this is what we do, this is why we exist. When we're talking to clients, we're looking for for companies really that have, some sort of mission. A lot of times for us, it's just like, do they believe in their people? Are they developing their people, et cetera, et cetera? I love working with people that are, that want to change the world, that want to do things differently. But it's really, I think my belief around business is really it's a communal effort, to deliver some product, service, whatever it is to a target market. And so it goes back to help, like you said, if we can help on multiple levels, we've done what we came to do.
Yeah.
I love that.
I'm often reminded that wonderful proverb, which is, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together.
Yeah. 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 Awesome.
And so
Awesome.
many, I see this as well with many of the companies I advise. They often hire based on a skill set, or, here's a set of criteria and it seems to match, the resume seems to match what I'm looking for. And they have this wonderful years in the trenches of being an XYZ company. But the ones that really do well, I find, are the ones that connect on that fundamental belief system, as you've outlined. And when that happens, then you can always add skills to people. You could always train them, but to get them to see what we're all about, it's something that has to be almost inherent, doesn't it?
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. How do you reinforce that, in a company? I mean, your company, one of the conversations we had recently is, you've got your founder, the company starts to grow, gets more complex, and that initial mission or whatever, if it's not intentionally worked on, it can get diluted. I mean, how do you avoid that? And I mean, you work with larger companies. I mean, how do you reinstall that if that's the case?
Yeah, I mean, the simple exercise, as many of us have done, is to ensure that there's company values that are shared. You articulate it, you list it, you sometimes put it on the wall, you hand it out to people, but it doesn't really mean anything if people don't fundamentally believe it. So you could have these words, but it's really living and breathing it. And it does come from the top, it's not do as I say, it truly is do as I do. So if you live and breathe it, you reinforce it, you use those decisions to base your business, and people respond to it. For my own example, I get sometimes notoriously known for maybe firing clients, yeah. And it's not that I don't get along with them, but sometimes their purpose can't really be served by mine because my direction a little bit different. And sometimes it causes staff a little bit of discomfort, having to work with them. And to me, it's more important to look at the long game than really that short term gain. So often I will have to exit a client because they just don't simply align with where we're going. And they're not making things the way I had created, which is to inspire other people to try to do good in this world.
How does that impact? And it,
In the beginning, when I set out this company and said, oh, we're only going to work with impact companies, I thought it would actually reduce the number of companies that would come on as accounts. What I found was it really to be the opposite. Much to my happiness in that way, part of me was looking for a way to taper off and retire a little bit so that I could spend a little bit less time in the trenches. What I began finding was there were more and more people simply looking for that same alignment. And it's surprising what's out there. I think when you try to blast and try to get everybody on side, you're just spread a little bit too thin and you can't really capture who you are. When you're able to articulate truly what you're all about and the reason why you exist, then other people can begin to align with that.
yeah, yeah, definitely. At what point, would a company, um, hire you? I think, we have lots of conversations, around like marketing, like, oh, you need a marketer, blah, 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 but branding, I think doesn't appear to have, that return on investment. Marketing, we're driving leads, but
Mhm.
branding, we are. What is that value for the company? And again, I mean, when do companies typically say, hey, I need to bring in the brand guy?
Yeah, the best time is really at the beginning when you're trying to shape your product or service, or trying to shape the company itself. I've been involved with many companies midstream. I've been involved with companies that suddenly feel they need to overhaul their brand because they plan to put themselves up for sale in a few years. And I've been in many of those situations that at that point I began realizing that the brand part of it has a huge impact on it because it helps to shape public perception. It helps to shape really that manner in which you are all about. And while you can't maybe directly have an ROI, what you can do is have a type of brand that people can respond to well, and that part can be monetized. And I've had a number of companies say to me, without this, I don't think we could have got the price that we did for the sale of the company. So they've attributed as much as 25% to value to the company just based on the brand itself. And that's phenomenal, but not unexpected at the same time, because brand is what helps distinguish you in the marketplace. And if you do the job right, and it isn't simply just a logo or a visual manifestation of what you're all about, really what it is having people understand what you're all about and being able to connect to it. And when you have that connection, that's really what the brand is all about.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So, what's the difference between laughing because I've done this. What's the difference between developing your own brand internally and working with you?
I think it's that outside perspective that can often shed light on who you are. But it is okay to do it yourself. The only thing I would advise people looking to create their personal brand is also get input from other people, because we have a very one-dimensional view of ourselves, and it could be maybe underwhelming. We may not be as confident in how we see ourselves, or the opposite. We may see ourselves as much bigger than what we are, or only a small part of it. When you get that outside perspective, as you're open to it, whether it's through personality tests, assessments, whether it's through people just simply providing some input, it gives you an overview. And those who are particularly good and very emotionally, let's say, empathetic, can often determine how they're being perceived by people, even within a short time in a meeting. Taking that further, of course, if you understand how you fit in the marketplace, then you can begin to either adjust, to align to who you really want to be, or find a way to bring this best part of you to light. Because in the end, it really is only one aspect that you're showing to the world. And the better that you can bring it to people, then obviously the better.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I know one of the things I've struggled with, and I've seen it like historically, and I've seen a lot of companies struggle with is telling that story.
Hmm.
Oh, so go to these networking events, and they're like, "What do you do?" It's like, "Oh, I'm an operations consultant. I help companies." Blah 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 blah. It was thinking back, it was absolutely horrible. You see people's like eyes glaze over, yada yada. And like I've seen, especially like software and that sort of thing,
Hmm.
where it's like, oh, yeah, our software does this, and they're telling this story about these features and that sort of thing. And it's like, how do you get past that? How do you get a real understanding of what your company is really about, what that story is?
Yeah, I think those are perfect examples, particularly in a network setting, because in that network setting, often many of the people may not, in fact, be your target market to begin with. So part of doing that is sussing them out, doing that little bit of filtering to determine how deep you can go with your story. So the things we work with, and we think of in terms of threes. So how do you describe yourself maybe in 3 seconds, which is often one word, right, to get people hooked? How do I describe myself in 30 seconds, right? Which is a little bit longer of a story. And how do I describe myself in 3 minutes? So you can imagine in the beginning, what you're really trying to do is simply get across that one word or that 3 second story to people. If they're interested, you go a little bit deeper and I can tell you a little bit more. Beyond that, then how do you go to the longer story? And most people aren't interested in it, but the ones who are will spend time with you, and that allows you to get into that 3 minute story at that time.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Interesting. I've heard the and maybe this is the approach, but I've heard the approach where you tell the big story and then you reduce it. Okay, let's take this. Okay, you got 3 bits. All right, let's get it down to 1 minute. All right, let's get it to
Mhm.
30 seconds. Let's get it down to 2 or 3 words. Is that kind of the approach you take, or do you take more the opposite approach?
Yeah, so imagine almost like two funnels coming together at a point. So we do a lot of work because often people will have a very wide story and there's a lot of information. So you start off wide, you begin to filter and filter and filter down. I do this exercise where we try to have yourself expressed in 6 words. Because if you think of a billboard, for example, you're driving along a freeway, you have maybe a few seconds to take it in. The most you can typically bring in is about 6, 7 words. One of the exercises I do with people is actually inspired by Ernest Hemingway, because apparently, as the story goes, he was in a bar in Havana and he bet the guy next to him that he could write a short story in 6 words. And he said, the other guy said, I'll take that bet over a tequila. So on a little napkin, apparently he writes baby shoes for sale, never worn. And it was a beautiful story where you begin to put in your own thoughts and theater of the mind. But it was a wonderful way of capturing it. And if you think of that approach, those few words are really just the beginning because you want to, okay, well, where did those baby shoes come from? How did that happen? Why are they, and so you're doing the same sort of thing where you're trying to express enough about yourself to get people intrigued. So you begin the conversation because really a story is a little bit more than just a simple monologue, but hopefully a conduit to some back and forth engagement and a conversation with people. So what we do with that is begin even distilling it further, saying you begin to own one single word. So if I say the word Volvo, which has a reputation for one word, which was safety, of course. When I say Nike, you think of winning. When I say Apple, you think of innovation. So all those major great brands have distilled themselves down to a single word. And people can do this as well. And if we were working together, not that you need help with your brand, Rick, but in that brief conversation, I really got to that point where my hypothesis would have been that your word would have been around helping people or help of some sort. So you begin building from that. So once you have that one word, now you begin to re-expand it because it's not all that big story that you shared in the beginning, but using that as almost the moral of the story. How do you build it out so I can support and begin to tell a tale around it? How do I bring that to life and visually? How do I exact it in my social media? How do I bring it to any sort of advertising or that sign on the wall, for example?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I like that. I like that. I like that approach. I know with sometimes when I'm working on different projects, it's literally I'm doing something and just like eureka, and I stop and
Mhm.
just like, okay, let me write this down. And it's kind of that approach though, because it's like it's almost like, random brainstorming, but like you're saying, just kind of distilling it down and then being able to rebuild it into something that is somewhat cohesive and then redoing it again. Yeah, it's the thing that and I think it has to be done, but it sounds like work. It sounds
Mhm.
like we go into a room with executives or whomever, And like, okay, guys, we are going to refine this brand. We're going to create a brand, or whatever that is. I mean, what is it? You told us some of the tactics and that sort of thing, but I mean, what is that experience like?
I think part of it, and the beauty of these workshops that you've described, is to actually begin to align people. Because many of the companies I work with, their brand may have been in existence for decades, and it's maybe moved off a little of the path. And often the leader of the company says we need to get people thinking the same thing, because your brand is often manifested by its weakest link. You could have this wonderful brand of helpful service, for example, but you could have a very bad experience at the retail level or the customer service level, and your brand begins to fall apart. So sometimes the work I do is to help realign people with it. And often what happens is many times the people are telling the story all differently. So bringing everybody into the same room, doing some of this exercise, we begin to align and get people thinking the same way. When you can, again, bring it down to that single set of words or that single word, and people can get behind it. Now they begin to understand it. Now they begin to know how to interpret it and bring it to life, of course, and they share their version of the story. But in the end, it becomes the same sort of thing.
I love it. I love it. I love it. One of the other things I was thinking is, I mentioned it, early on, with the personal brand. It's like sometimes when you develop that personal brand, while it's authentically you, perhaps you weren't acting that out. Perhaps you were a little bit, uh, conservative or whatever. You weren't
Mhm.
really living that out. Comes to mind is with a business. And so when we're looking at a company, they've created their brand. I imagine there are going to be operational changes, that may take place as a result of this is what we do, this is who we serve, et cetera, et cetera. Is that your experience?
Yeah, often that is the case because you still need to operationalize it to your point, Rick. And that's like, how do you bring that to life? How do I do the road show to inform everybody at the same time? And this is often where the weak spots begin to appear within the company, because sometimes you're at cross purposes with the people who may not understand the brand, or they have their own motivation for why they're doing things, or this is the way I do things. And this is where that misalignment begins to show itself. And often, company leaders will take a very hard look at those people, because a successful company, as you can imagine, is where all people are rowing in the same direction. They're all rowing in synchronicity. And if it doesn't happen, then that's where some adjustment needs to be made. And it could simply be having people understand what you're really about again, and that's where that purpose and why you exist. And again, if they're not aligned to it, maybe they're maybe a harsher look at that fit of the person, of course. But by and large, I think people are looking to be led. They're looking for a direction to go, and then that's really the goal of the company leader and why they exist, of course.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. How do you hold that team accountable? I mean, we've done the work. We're promoting it. Internally, we're promoting it externally. How do you hold the team accountable, and how do you even hold the leadership accountable? A lot of times, we see these exercises, and the leader is like out of alignment sometimes.
Hmm.
It's preaching
Yeah,
it,
yeah.
but
Or they end up going off course in the middle of execution. So a lot of it really begins how committed they are to it and how important this brand mission may be for them. So it often means check-ins. It often means assessments during different points. Many large companies, you can imagine, have what they refer to as a chief brand officer. And that isn't simply a title, fancy title for all things that are related to logos or related to the high profile brand itself. It really has to permeate through the company. And that's where it is particularly important to have you lieutenants be able to exact the brand and understand it. And you go back to the days of apostles, let's say, people who really are able to take that common word forward and be able to share it with people and inspire people. Because you obviously can't do it alone, but if you have enough people who are your emissaries and can represent the brand, and this is even true in consumer land, your consumer sometimes becomes your best advocates for your brand because they embrace it and they believe what it believe in. There was a situation years ago, and you may recall this, where Gap was trying to change their brand, their logo, and they came out with a new logo, and people got so upset. They were writing petition letters, they were sending nasty notes. It was just before social media really took off, but the point was still made that this is not no longer your brand, but our brand, and you've gone off course, and we're going to try to correct it. So Gap listened to that, of course, and brought the old logo back, and it's stayed ever since that.
That's brilliant. That's brilliant. I love that. What's a great brand turnaround story that you could share?
I think you see this a lot in car companies, of course, companies that, begin to lose their luster and they get reinvigorated. A classic example over the years is, Jaguar, for example, as a car for many years, or even another one, Mercedes. Both of them are very similar in their story. Have become that sort of older white gentleman's car, something that people didn't necessarily aspire to, but if you had money, you would have it, but you would often be frowned upon. By realigning the brand, by standing for slightly different aspects of what they are, which is a little bit more that fun, exhilaration, embracing of life, and that both Mercedes and Jaguar were able to capture not only a new audience, but be able to reshape their brand so they became aspirational again. That's a wonderful turnaround brand when you're able to bring it back to what you represented in the beginning. And that happens a lot too in many brands. They get very comfortable where they are, and without shaking things up a little bit, it becomes a little bit staid, a little bit stale, and people don't gravitate to it again.
Yeah. What came to mind, I guess also in the auto industry is, and I hope I get the brand right. Yeah, when they first came
Hmm.
out, it was
Yeah,
cheap, affordable vehicle, and then now you look on the
exactly.
road, wow, that's the key. That's an awesome looking vehicle. Is that like do you feel like that was a strategy that they had from inception, or is that just them adapting to the American market? Or
I don't know what went on behind the scenes, but done correctly, part of the goal would have been to, we need to position ourselves as being a little bit more futuristic or a little bit more contemporary. So how do we manifest ourselves? So that's where the design part comes in. And we know from many cases, and other brands like Apple, for example, reinvigorated themselves and became aspirational. The tale of where Apple went, they ended up being beige boxes. While when Steve Jobs wasn't there, when he came back, he reinvigorated things. But again, it was a manifestation of his vision and manifestation of his design ethics, aesthetics as well. So with that, you can really bring a lot to life, and we can't ignore the power of design and what it means. So a logo may not be able to motivate people, but a well-designed product and a well sort of presented product can make a world of difference.
yeah, yeah. I often say to my team, what do we, what are we known for? What do we want to be known for? And it's like from there that allows us to, look at it, look from an innovative perspective. What do we want to develop? What do we want the customer story to be like, et cetera, et cetera. Is that a typical approach, or do companies take different approaches to developing their brand?
Yeah, I think it depends on how it's acted upon, for example. So we could often have an exercise, and I've seen this be the folly of many companies where they, let's say, try to write a mission statement together, meaning that everybody inputs on it so they get a chance to have a bit of the phrase or their keywords, and you try to make it democratic. And so it becomes a conglomeration of everybody's thoughts. What it lacks is maybe that clear direction. You really need to be solo in that way. As a company leader, here's what I believe in, and I hope you do as well, because this is why we exist. How will you help me bring it to life is really perhaps the question, as opposed to how do you see where the company is going. So if you set something out and people understand what the goal is and where the goalposts are, they'll play their heart out, hopefully to help you reach that, of course.
I love that. I love that. That's I think that was one of those thoughts I had in the back of my brain because I've done
Hmm.
the the democratic mission development. And,
Yeah.
I remember looking back and just thinking, it's like, I don't know if they're going to own it. And that's always been my fear. And I try not to, I guess, guide people. Historically, I've tried not to guide people in that, but it's like, I can't create your mission for you. I can't create your vision for you. I can, kind of, me personally, you could do it, I'm sure.
Mhm.
But it's like that leader has to own that, like you were saying, and then, get everybody else in alignment. And I've seen where companies have done that. Company just comes to mind right now, and like, okay, this is what we're doing. This is direction that we're going in, and it becomes a choice, for the team. They
Yeah.
decide whether or not, the direction the company's going in, because they have clear picture of that. They get to decide whether or not this is where they want to be.
Yeah,
So I think it's great.
exactly. And I think that that's fundamental. I met Brian Scudamore years ago. He's the founder of 1-800-GOT-JUNK, wonderful success story of garbage hauling. And he shared this story with me where he was running a successful business, and he had, I think just under 50 employees at that time, lots of trucks, and they were doing a good business, but everybody was doing things differently than how he wanted. And it was a very difficult thing, but it was the right thing he did. And he came in one day, he told me, and said, I'm closing the company down. It's not going the direction I want. And what he did was he ended up firing everybody and restarting the company with his mission in place. His goal was to be the gentlest, most kindest service provider. His goal was to end up on Oprah. His goal was to do good with the money he was going to make. His whole paint a picture, as you described it, had a very different picture than everybody else. But once he set that out, he was able to bring people on who had the same vision, and they would go to the nth degree for him. And that's a benefit of being able to set it out rather than simply to have other people tell you where the company should go, because they're in a way being paid, and which is great. But what is the thing that goes beyond that paycheck itself? What drives them? And if those motives align, then you have people who will stay with you forever, who will simply be the best that they can because the missions align.
Yeah, absolutely. Awesome. So, Henry, you wrote a book. You want to talk about that real quick?
Yeah, so I think it is a summation of a lot of things I've talked about today. It actually came out of COVID when a lot of us were on lockdown. I had a little bit more time on my hand than other people for a brief period of time. So I began documenting a lot of the process, and things that I often use with my clients. So it became a page by page, chapter by chapter approach to bringing your brand to life, and figuring out the story and how to tell it, and being able to manifest it in the marketplace. So it's hopefully a helpful guide. I was finding there were also a number of people who would come to me to try to create their brand on as they were building their careers. And, the unfortunate part with a lot of consultancies is not everyone can afford your fees, but at the same time, I want to make this information accessible to people, hence the book itself.
Awesome. Does it include like tools and that sort of thing? Or
Yeah, the little exercises as you go through it. The most important thing, if there's anything that we can take away even from today's discussion, is really to be able to understand your story and how to tell it. Because through that story, it's really a medium by which you can get people aligned to where you're going and what your mission is all about. And hopefully they'll join you for that ride at the same time.
And if people want to get in touch with you and learn more about what you're doing and get your book, I mean, how do they do that?
I have a very simple website, henrywong.co, and my book's on the site, my contact information. Love to always connect with people. So very much looking forward to anyone who is happy to reach out.
Awesome. And you're on LinkedIn as well, right?
LinkedIn as well.
Okay, cool. And what we'll do is we'll put the links on the show notes. So anybody that listens or watches the show, they can certainly reach out to you. Words of wisdom before we call it a day.
I think I always think of what we talked about in the beginning, and that is being true to yourself. I often think of that Shakespeare line, "To thine own self be true." And I think it's very important for people to stay true to themselves as they navigate their success.
I love it. I am completely aligned with it. That's perfect. Henry, thank you so much for joining us today. This
Thank you, Rick. Yeah, I really enjoyed my time here. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. You're welcome. All right, folks, we have completed another episode of the Relentless Pursuit of Winning podcast. We'll catch you next time.